Hello, builders of good. Thank you for tuning in to the BuildGood fundraising podcast. Fundraising isn't easy, but it should be simple. So on this show, we take the mystery out of raising money. Now, in every episode, we typically coach you to build your fundraising like a flywheel. Flywheel has 5 steps. Number 1 is listening to donors. Number 2 is engaging them. Number 3 is asking the right people for the right things. Number 4 is celebrating every gift. And number 5 is reporting back in a responsive and real-time way. If you master the 5 parts of the flywheel, your fundraising flywheel will start to spin reliably with less effort on your part. Your revenue will grow, and so will your career. Every week, we focus on one part of the flywheel, but today, we're actually focusing on how this sort of stuff is implemented around the world and not just in North America. We're talking to Michael Johnston, CEO of HJC Media, and his learnings about fundraising around the world in the last 30 years. So here's my conversation with Michael Johnston. Hey, Michael.
Hey, how are you today?
Good. Thanks for coming on the show. I know you've had a crazy couple of weeks, and you're kind of back at home. So thanks for being
here. I've got some water here.
All right, sounds good. You've been a fundraiser since 1987, when you were trained as a NATO analyst, but instead went into direct mail fundraising. How does that happen?
When you can't find a job as a NATO analyst. So when I was in university, and I only just realized this. So during the Cold War, what do you do if you like politics and history? You take Russian history, you take Russian language, Central Eastern European politics, and a lot of the history of warfare. So when I put all those things together, it was pretty clear that was the training. And so I looked for jobs in military institutes and defense institutes and Canadian government, and there was none. And so the interesting thing, Mike, and this relates back to your flywheel, and for me, it relates to everything that we'll talk about today, that when I was taking comparative politics and societies, we studied the third sector, civil society. So back in the 80s, the distinguishing feature of autocracy, kind of communist dictatorships, comparing them to the West, the difference was civil society, right? It was a healthy nonprofit sector, because you could have a market economy that was controlled, and you would have government. And so that extra thing, I just studied it, and I knew it was super important. And so when I couldn't get a NATO job, I said, okay, well, hey, there's this third sector. What do people do in that third sector? And I noticed there was a job posting at a direct mail firm, Stephen Thomas. And I went, oh, okay. I don't know what that's all about, but I went and read up on direct response fundraising and got my first job. I remember my girlfriend at the time, I cried. It's like, oh my God, I got my first job. I'm so happy. But it was interesting. It was a great introduction to a part of civil society that I've been told was so important as a distinguishing feature. And now it's how I've always looked at things, Mike, and I never really put the pieces together. And I've just spent the last few weeks in Central Eastern Europe, especially. And so when I was spending time in Romania doing fundraising training, so we had about 50 nonprofits, some from Moldova and some from the Ukraine, and mainly from Romania. They don't take the nonprofit sector for granted. And Mike, like, people just take it for granted here. They forget how important it is. I mean, lots of people both volunteer and work hard to make the flywheel, right? I mean, you're teaching organizations in 5 important ways to be stronger. But I was just reminded, it's like an energy boost. You go over there and they just dig into the learnings, and it's almost like they leapfrog over top of some of the sclerotic ways that we do both fundraising and run nonprofits here. They go, oh, that's cool, Mike. Moves management and mid-level programs. And how I could move people from a mid-level program to major gifts and plan give it legacies. It works there. Just say, right, we're going to do that.
Right.
So, I mean, I'm that view that it's a differentiator in our society always keeps me motivated. And just looking farther afield just reminds me that I think we have to push hard here to remind ourselves how important the sector is, and that we need organizations to be nimble and change and keep up with things. And that's hard sometimes here. So
Yeah.
does that make sense?
When I said you had a couple of crazy weeks, you've spent 2 weeks in Europe. You were in Romania, you were in Slovakia, you were in Holland.
Yep.
And you do that kind of thing quite often. I saw a few months ago, I think you were in Switzerland. So you travel quite often because you have global clients, but also because you get invited to train people in different parts of the world.
Yep.
And the reason we're having this chat is you talked about studying comparative politics. Well, now what you're doing is you're studying comparative knowledge in the fundraising sector, because you get to go to all these places and see what's happening. So I'm hoping that you can give us a bit of a masterclass today, or a bit of an insight in what's happening around the world. We have listeners, 80% of this podcast, like people who listen to this podcast, are in North America. 20% are not. They're elsewhere in the world. Yeah. So maybe you can give us a bit of insights on the last 30 years of traveling and fundraising. What's going on out there?
I mean, I think a fundamental difference long time ago was monthly giving. So I don't know if you know, Mike, that monthly giving started in Austria, face-to-face giving. It started with Greenpeace. I worked with those fellows who started all of those things. And so Europe almost skipped a lot of traditional OTG kind of build programs and traditional channels and skip to face-to-face fundraising. And that means they just built very sophisticated monthly giving, and monthly giving was the most important thing. That's not to say we don't know how to do those things here, but that was interesting to see over the last 20 years that they almost jump frogged a one-time gift and went right to monthly. And the takeaway for me always here is, I mean, one, we still fight the fight to say that face-to-face fundraising, whether it's at the mall, whether it's at the door, whether it's on the street, is even acceptable in North America. And so it's interesting always to see channels that are working in one place and not the other. And so that's a first that I learned a long time ago, taking what people are doing elsewhere, let's say it's face-to-face fundraising, and bringing it across here. Or SMS text, Mike. So way back when we would look at our clients who were in Nordic countries, most especially, so whether it was Denmark or Norway or Sweden, what they were doing with SMS text and cultivation and stewardship, and getting them not just to give micro donations, to give 15 euros a month. They were doing that so long ago that we started to at least port those examples over here and start to influence what was a delayed response. There's no doubt. In the digital outlook report that we just did and have done a number of times, we ask people who's using SMS text. In Europe, we notice 100% of organizations tend to be using SMS text in some way. Here, it's around 75%. And I think the study is, even awkwardly shifted because it's a digital study. I mean, I would be pretty comfortable to say half of organizations in North America have never touched it. Could be even lower than that. So it's funny. What I've learned is often North America, especially Americans, they tend to invent technologies. They export it. And then nonprofit organizations use that technology, like SMS and mobile phones. It was all kind of created in the United States. They exported it. Organizations figure it out, and then it creeps back here. So interesting.
Yeah. Just a point of clarification, you mentioned OTG. That stands for one-time gift. Yeah. So I want to dive in there a little bit. Key difference is some other countries were really monthly giving forward right from the beginning, whereas the prevailing wisdom, North America and Canada, was often, well, get a first-time gift, just get in the door, get the address, get the name. And then later you can maybe work at getting a second gift, maybe a third gift, and then maybe we can start talking about monthly giving.
Mm-hmm. And there's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely. I think, I mean, for someone who, I mean, we're all working in one-time gift environments even now, and it's so important to think, I mean, what are the channel combinations? I think that was one of the big changes comparatively. I think outside of North America, we saw a lot of use of the phone to convert donors to become monthly donors. That seemed like heresy for a while in North America. Now it's standard operating procedure to have the phone as a companion to, let's say, digital one-time gift donors. If you end up with their telephone number, then you use the phone to convert. But those kind of multi-channel conversions really started outside of North America and then crept over here. So interesting.
Yeah. Face-to-face is another interesting example. We know it's worked very well in the UK, for example, and other places of the world for a long time. And there's been fits and starts of like outfits in Canada and North America who are trying it out here. I don't know enough if it just didn't work or if the buy-in from the sector wasn't there to actually really give it a good go. One thing that I've sometimes thought about is, so we've got relatives in Europe, and when we go to Germany or to Switzerland, you see like there's like 10-year-old kids on the tram or on the bus going to school by themselves. And just like the level of trust in society seems to be a lot higher.
Yeah.
And so maybe the door-to-door thing is just like, well, it's not all that weird for a stranger to knock on your door because maybe society is a little bit more trusting. I have no idea if that's true or not.
Yeah.
Just
That's neat. I mean, the cultural arguments around reticence. I think that could be it. I think North America it has more of a short-termism view of fundraising return on investment. So, I mean, you've talked about this a number of times. I'm sure that I think that short-termism makes us stop doing door-to-door or face-to-face because the break-even point is 2 years from now or 2.5 years from now, and people they barf when they kind of see that at a board level or a C-suite. But this is interesting, Mike. So years ago, we worked with Wood Green Community Center, so a tiny east end of Toronto community center, and they had a very forward-thinking Anne Rosenfeld, she's forward-thinking development director, and she said, "Hey, Mike, we both talked together and said, man, let's just go door to door. People know us in the community. Let's get some canvassing going at the door and ask for monthly donors." I said, "Oh, okay, well yep, absolutely. Let's build a model, a 10-year projection of net revenue ultimately." And so we did the models. We had I think it was a $50,000 investment. Everybody, no way, that's crazy talk. There's not a chance. And then we met the perfect board member, Mike, which was a mining executive. Mining executives they're perfect for long-term view of return on investment. And so we showed it to him. He was on the development committee, and he said, "Oh, okay, Mike. So it'll take us 2.5 years to break even, and then I'm going to get 7.5 years of incredible net return. Is that going to happen?" "Yes." Predictably, I said, "Yeah, once they walk through the door." He said, "Then why don't we do it?" And so they did it. And I think they got 300 monthly donors. Awesome. I mean, they were the first month. That is great. Door to door. So I think North America suffers from this short-termism. And for some reason, Europe has been able to look at numbers and projections and say, hey, we'll wait for 2 years and then we'll have a glorious period of net return. So I think that's influence. We're trying to bring that perspective across. That's for sure. So.
Yeah, you say like, man, the return is going to be there in 2.5 years. And for nonprofits to be like, oh man, that's way too long. That's 2.5 years. Like you listen to people like Warren Buffett, they think in decades. They don't even think in like even 2.5 years would be super short term, right? They think in decades out. So do a lot of portfolio managers. So it's interesting.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I often tell this story of it was either at Oxford or Cambridge, and they noticed that one of the large timbers in one of the colleges was hollowing out. And they said, that's impossible. We cannot replace it because it'll take 300 years to grow another one. Someone said, oh, we planted trees 300 years ago to replace it. And so they got out the map of where the trees were planted near the college, and they went and they found the 300-year-old tree and they took it. So like humans can accept and plan for the future. So maybe we need a little bit more of that in fundraising. But I mean, I wanted to pick up on another thing comparatively, Mike, and that is around planned giving. So it's kind of a competitive advantage. So we've done a lot of legacy work around the world, and there are often impediments to legacies and planned gifts. They're called legacies in other parts of the world. We often call it planned giving here for some reason. And that's British precedent, right? British common law makes it easier for someone. Mike, you could turn around in your room and you could write a will on a banana peel and say, I'm leaving it all to my hamsters. And there is a good chance in court that by British common law that you would be allowed to do that. So there are lots of countries we've worked in that have Napoleonic code, right? Napoleon's kind of civil code that kind of was created during his tyranny, but a bureaucratic blessing in that case. And a lot of countries have Napoleonic code. So we were doing some work in Argentina. It has Napoleonic code, and by law, you can't leave, right? You have to leave all of your assets to family by law. But you can write something, and if the family agrees, then you can leave something. And so we created, a legacy program for Greenpeace in Argentina, even though Napoleonic code stood in the way. But, I was talking about the advantage of Europe in thinking more long-term and bringing channels to us. I think in planned giving, we are far ahead in the social opportunity, cultural opportunity of planned giving. So I'm always surprised that North America isn't more deeply proactive. It's back to that short-termism. It's like, oh, we have to wait till they die? Like, why would I invest any money now to kind of get expectancies and then wait for those things and cultivate them and take care of them? And we don't want to do that. But it's such an advantage here. When I see the surveys that we send out and the percentage of people who are supporters who say, hey, I want to leave a bequest, much higher per capita and much larger, Mike. So in the United Kingdom, for example, like the average legacy is, and Richard Radcliffe will kill me on this, I think it's £12,000, £10,000. And what they've done is they've done large campaigns to get more people to leave, but they tend to be smaller amounts. But here, the amounts are, you tell me, by vertical, let's say anywhere from $30,000 to $60,000 on average, depending on the vertical. So I just comparatively, I think North America has such opportunity advantage around legacies, and we're in an aging society. I don't know why we don't do more. It's interesting compared to other countries where it's harder.
Yeah, and even why we don't do more, even as a service to our donors, which is, let's have this conversation about how we're going to help you create a legacy, no matter what the money, like, let's have that conversation. Let's have that conversation about life. I don't know if you find this. I find American vendors versus Canadian vendors around the legacy space, even there to be a difference, where it seems like our southern neighbors in the US are a lot more forward about the death conversation.
Yeah, for
sure. And Canadians are a little bit more, it tends to be more of a legacy conversation, more about a life conversation. And I'm exaggerating here, but some of the American marketing and successfully that I've seen, this is not a knock at all. Like, it seems to work. It's basically like, you're gonna die, let's talk about it.
Well, that's Canada, super interesting, Mike. I mean, I think I don't think you can go wrong with the Canadian approach, meaning we've run focus groups in Argentina and other countries outside of the kind of dominant North that focus on legacy, and legacy in the sense of what values, like the whole conversation in a 2-hour focus group in these countries starts with, what does it mean to leave a legacy? And the fourth meaning of legacy around financial, leaving something financially for a nonprofit, you get there eventually. But even they want to swim along in the journey of, I want to pass on the values to my children. I want my grandchildren to kind of have the values I've grown up with, those kind of legacies. And then you get to the instrument, the financial instrument of legacy. And even here, I mean, I can think I've done about 60 focus groups on planned giving in different countries, English-speaking countries. And the US and Canadian conversations are kind of the same for me. Like, I write the moderator's guide the exact same way. It's what it's a beautiful life's journey. And, one of the most important things that you can do at the end of your life is to realize and think through these important things. They're beautiful conversations. So I think you're bang on to, like, I think the mechanistic piece, I think you can be successful anywhere by concentrating on beautiful life journey and all of that stuff. So, but I think you're right.
Right. So we've talked about monthly giving a little bit. We've talked about face-to-face. We've talked about legacy giving. I'm curious, mid-level giving is by far, it's one of the things we help clients with. It's becoming more and more of a thing in North America. Still huge opportunities, at least the way I see it. I don't know how you see it. Is there mid-level giving in other countries?
Good question. I just did a masterclass on mid-level giving at the IFC, so it was fun. But we did a survey we had 35 people in the masterclass, and 22 of them did not have a mid-level program, Mike. 22 of the 35. And of the 12 others, a lot of them were INGOs in country. So I don't just make it up. It's like UNICEF Slovakia. Like, I mean, it's because they're brother sister countries, especially North America or Australia or the United Kingdom had it, right? And they've kind of poured it over some of the basics. Yeah. But I think you're right. Like, we're spending more time thinking through the mid-level program, because whether it's in North America, whether it's in Europe, it just doesn't really exist. But in Romania, where we did some work a few weeks ago, and then in Slovakia, it's clear it's pretty, I mean, it's not even the missing middle in the sense of a third of organizations have a program. It's like nobody has a mid-level program. And it's interesting, Mike, because they have monthly donors. They've built pretty solid monthly, and they have one-time gift donors, and they have event donors, and they have all kinds of things. Clearly, they don't know how to get started, Mike. And maybe that's the similarity here. Like, where do I start? Do I have to have a name? Do I have to have a logo? What are the benefits and privileges? Right. Is there such a thing? What's the dollar amount? Like, do I start at 500 or do I like? And I think that's stopping people. And I think it stops people here. So that was the interesting thing as we explored this the last few weeks. It reminded me that what I was hearing in Europe is true here. Like, some of the things, I think you were smiling because you probably heard these things many times.
I'm smiling because we know how to treat, I don't like the word mass, but everybody knows what I mean when I say mass. So we know how to do a mass fundraising program. Yeah. And we know how to do major donor giving. We know that's relational conversations, one-on-one, lunches, coffees, developing a proposal together. Like, we know how to do both of those. It's this middle piece that we are kind of confused. And here's
why. Tiffany Wallen, she runs the mid-level program for MSF US. If she ever listens to this, I mean, she taught the masterclass with me, and for a reason. She is the Yoda, I think, of mid-level programs. And I think her program sometimes makes, don't laugh, Mike, $100 million a year with 1.5 staff. 1.5 staff. She's just an idiot savant. Yeah. But she says that the secret is the marriage right? Between what major gift officers understand and mass marketing. And that's what stops a lot of people too. It's like, how peanut butter and chocolate, how do they go together? Well, when you do get them together, they're super delicious, but it's hard to kind of bring them together because they're almost separate business models, right? They're almost separate paradigms in people's minds. So
yeah.
I think I'm happy to share information. I mean, we've done a bunch of webinars for the Nonprofit Times on mid-level giving, and there's a lot of resources I can share from Sea Change, and like I don't know if you've talked about or know Sea Change strategies in Washington. They've done 3 mid-level studies and they share them in the marketplace and all that. So it's interesting. Like I'm seeing, it's almost as if it's a bigger gap on mid-level giving, but they seem to be really hungry, Mike, to kind of like just tell us what to do and we'll just get started. And that's what we're saying. Just get started. I don't care what it looks like. Just get it going. And Roger Craver, kind of he really started mid-level programs back in the 70s, probably, talking to him a few weeks ago with the Nonprofit Times. And he said, just induct people. Just bring them in. Just choose 500 people or 1,000 people. Let's go, hey, you're part of the club now. Like, just don't wait for anything. Just say, man, you're in. Like, we're just inducting you into this beautiful place. And then start moving them along. And I think it's the moves management piece as well that worries people or stops them. Like, am I moving them towards something? I know I'm supposed to be moving them down the field. I'm moving them from somewhere to mid-level, and then I'm moving them higher up. How do I do that? What does that look like? And it doesn't have to be complicated. So I think people are intimidated by something that's not that complicated, frankly. So
Yep, I like that Roger Craver encouragement. Just his default to action. Action yields information, right? Just do something and see how it goes. And
that's Roger.
you'll get there.
But that reminds me. But Roger Craver in action, Mike. I mean, I remember years ago. He was saying, Mike, like, you don't dedupe acquisition. You send people multiple packages. Like, the hell with it. They're busy, and send them 3. What does it matter? Like, they're going to pick up one of them and then they'll throw the other 2 away. It's like, that's Roger Craver.
You get the second or the third envelope and you're like, this looks familiar. I don't know. Somehow it just feels familiar. I'm going to open it up.
I mean, they did testing, right? He said they did testing, and their response is higher when they don't dedupe and when they don't do the merge purge. It's the political persuasion, right? To do that. That's the hard part.
Yeah, which is another interesting differentiator, which is talk about comparative knowledge, like political fundraising and fundraising for non-political purposes is oftentimes same techniques, same tactics, a lot of the same things apply, except political fundraising is a little bit less concerned about lifetime value. They're very much concerned about, what can happen in the next 3 months.
Money and win. Yeah. I mean, I've done a lot of, it's funny, I did a bunch of fundraising for the Australian Labor Party in the past, US Democrats, and helped run the Green Party UK fundraising a few elections ago. And then I've omnivorously, Mike, the Conservatives, the NDP, and the Liberals in Canada, just kind of maybe a Swiss Guard mercenary from time to time, like just... all parties are important. That's the old Cold War in me.
Right.
Everybody's important. But it's interesting with political fundraising and what we can kind of learn. And I think about cross-border learning. I mean, the Americans, it's always interesting to watch because often after every presidential election, whoever wins, some of the people who run digital kind of spin off companies and run around the world, whether it's Blue State or all kinds of companies before then. I think the hard part for people who are political fundraisers is they don't have the peak public awareness that makes it so possible in non-campaign times, or if you're working for a hospice somewhere. Like, it is very different. You can put anything out the door and every single news channel is talking, right, about what you're raising money for at that time. And then, like you said, the intensity of the time period. But that I've taken away. Like, how do you create, I'm not going to call it manufacturing, but how do you create a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? With an intensity that's a few months long. So often we'll take what we've learned from political fundraising in different countries and just that, I'll just call it manufactured intensity or manufactured profile and intensity to get more people to respond. I mean, there's something to learn from political fundraising. So,
Yeah. The last thing I want to get into, and might be a longer conversation. This is my naive way of thinking about things. Naively, I think, well, fundraising might look different around the world, but ultimately it's all humans talking to humans. And the human brain maybe hasn't changed all that much since our prehistoric times. And a lot of the same things that might work here, like we talked about the flywheel earlier, might work anywhere because you're talking to humans.
yep.
However, there is this thing about culture creating context and context influencing the way you think about something or perceive something. You might even experience the exact same message in one context and react to it one way, and then you might experience it in another context and react to it differently. How much does cultural nuances sort of impact what we can learn from fundraising across borders?
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, I think, let's say 80% is the same, right? It's all the things that you would talk about or I would talk about, like human to human, right? Stories of need, how problems can be solved by finances given voluntarily by people. That's all the same. I mean, I've never, I think about campaigns multi-country, that 80% of it is the same. But fundraising success is built on tiny percentages. So we do notice that we need cultural context, and I would call it tweaking, like really tweaks of, we found in some countries that a PS doesn't work. It's weird, like, right? In some countries it does, and I've never even been able to figure that out. Some countries underlining and circling things, right, is a no-go for some reason. I have no idea why that is. I haven't even been able to have enough time to figure it out. So, but it's the 20%, right? It's in the majority, you stick to best principles regardless of the country. And then it's all the small tweaks around the side. So that means, Mike, I mean, I'm sure you could be successful if you went to Poland, right, and gave advice and helped the Polish Red Cross. I mean, I think the principles that you practice every day and the 5 points that you made at the beginning, that's going to help people raise money there. So, I mean, the one thing I would say, Mike, so the 80-20 rule really around what's the same elsewhere and what's different. But what I do notice is where people come from. So we have people who either they've existed inside the fundraising industrial complex for a long, long time, or they've come from fundraising education. There's no such thing in a lot of these countries. So a lot of them have come pretty sharp from the commercial sector, and I would say high flyers. So the one thing that's interesting is you tend to have people, again, last week in Romania, who I was thinking, damn, we could never get you in our sector. Like, you ran what? For whom? Some multinational. And there's actually a cachet. And I'm coming back to the very start, not taking our sector for granted. Like, people in some of these countries see this as the highest calling and the most interesting and rewarding work that they can do. And they move from the commercial sector and come across that doesn't happen a lot in our sector here. So, and I don't know what we do to kind of just remind people that this is a super, super important sector and they should choose it maybe over others. And I just don't see that problem in a lot of other countries. It's kind of a double-edged sword for us. We have a more mature civil society, but that maturity, I don't know, leads to less innovation and less new thinkers and all that. I don't know if that makes sense, Mike.
Yeah, I wonder if this goes back a little bit to Dan Pallotta's uncharitable argument and some other thinking around that. I had a years ago a board member tell me that our reserves were too high, and he said, I'm not going to give any more until you've spent it down.
Yeah.
And he was a successful business person, and I asked him, well, do you have reserves in your business? And he said, well, yeah, of course. You know, you never know when you need the cash flow. It prepares you to like
Yep.
make some acquisitions if you need, like, it's just good to have, right? I was like, okay, so how is this any different? And he's like, well, this is charity. You're supposed to spend it all. I was like, okay, this is like we've got this two rule book thing going on
I
where
know.
even highly accomplished people
It,
so embedded with what charity means in North America, they I don't know if I'm making any sense here,
yeah, you
but
are.
as you're talking, yeah.
I mean, I think about years ago, I wanted to ask about sort of customer service, taking good care of the donor. And Isidore Sharp, the founder of the Four Seasons, I just called his office, Mike, and I said, hey, can I come and talk to him? And they went, yeah, sure. When do you want to come in? It's like, awesome. And so I went in and I mean, he was very important around Terry Fox and kind of the Four Seasons supporting it. But he had a very traditional view, right? That Terry Fox shouldn't be investing, a lot of money. It should be volunteer driven. And I think one of the reasons why Terry Fox isn't making like St. Jude hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in this country is, again, I think we have founders of organizations, often from the commercial sector, who have these traditional views of it being a third class sector, right? And not to use the same principles of innovation and investment and all of that. I mean, Dan is super interesting. Dan Pallotta, I think his story is double-edged. I mean, you have to be careful if you're going to invest a lot more money than you have traditionally, because if it doesn't work, you're good. There's less to fall back on. Back to your thing about, there's less of a pot of money to protect you if things go wrong. Because I think about all these companies that have spun out of Dan's, all his prodigy. So I don't know if you remember CauseForce. CauseForce, right, was really Brian Pendleton, who came out of Dan Pallotta's shop, and a lot of other people from Dan's shop followed him. I mean, it took Dan's thing, like, you're going to pay premium dollar and we're going to provide premium service and we're going to have a whole lot of net revenue left over, but it's going to be expensive to run these things. I mean, ultimately, CauseForce ran into a cabal of nonprofits in Canada who just did not agree with that model and wanted to take that model internal. And that caused, there were lots of other reasons, but it caused great dysfunction and the collapse of, companies that provided what Dan would say is the kind of service that we should be providing in fundraising. So it's funny. I mean, I like his words, but man, I mean, there's almost an endless civil war raging back and forth about those perspectives. Super interesting.
Yeah. Well, thanks for taking the time to come on our podcast today. If people want to know more, they want to find out a little bit more about you, about your work, where can they find you?
Yep. I mean, they can go to hjcnewmedia.com. That's the first and best place to find us. And you can also, send me an email at mjohnston@hjcnewmedia.com. Or, you know what? You can send me a text, 416-524-0740. If we're talking about text earlier, let's talk about text now. So those are three good places to start for sure.
All right. Well, maybe we'll have you on in a few years and we'll talk about what's changed between now and then. That's all for today. Thank you so much for listening to the Build Good podcast. Here's my short action plan for you today. Today was more of a journey around the world talking about comparative knowledge when it comes to fundraising, but we did mention a few things. Face-to-face fundraising, which you may or may not have ever even looked into. Face-to-face really means door-to-door or standing in a mall or at a subway station, things like that. It's more popular in Europe, but I would encourage you to look into it. Just do a Google search, just read up on it a little bit. Might be something interesting, even for you to learn a little bit more about how fundraising is done in other parts of the world. And then mid-level giving. If most of you listening to this probably have heard a lot about mid-level giving, some of you are doing some of it. Some of you are clients of Mike's or of BuildGoods and are doing mid-level giving, but it is something that I encourage every charity in North America and elsewhere to at least begin the conversation on what does it mean, doing a bit of research, lots of resources available out there for you. Mike already mentioned a few by Sea Change out of the US. There's lots of info available. So as always, thank you for hanging out with us around the fundraising campfire. If you're listening to this, you're my kind of people. I'm your kind of people. Thank you for the work you do. I'm your host, Mike Dirksen, cheering you on as you build good in the world.